Bitcoin is the internet of value. And why would you ever have a competing chain or settlement layer that is number two? If you're having to pay a high fee to send money overseas or across borders, Lightning Network can do that for virtually free, and it's going to eat all of the closed payment networks. The ability to curate content or create content and get paid directly peer-to-peer is just an absolute game changer, and no one has seen where this is all going to go. I think you're just going to see this blossoming of the creative class, and I think people in quote-unquote crypto land talk about it, and there's, again, completely wrong rails, completely wrong business models, right idea. And so I think this is the real creator economy and what's going to enable. I think something that our world needs more of is tools to let people build their own futures and take control of their lives. I mean, how many new Steve Jobs are trapped in a country where, for no fault of their own, they can't participate and try their idea? And so I think the ability to earn online and the ability to receive remittances are the two that interest me most.
Max Webster is the founder of Hivemind Ventures, an early stage fund investing in Bitcoin companies building on the Lightning Network. In our conversation, Max explained why he's so excited about the Lightning Network. We discussed some of the big opportunities he sees today, specifically running Lightning nodes, liquidity marketplaces, and emerging Lightning payment apps. And we also got into finding product market fit, startup valuations, and identifying strong founders in the Lightning space. I've also added Max to today's show splits, so if you learn something new, if you find this episode to be interesting, the best way you can support the show is by sending in sats over the Lightning Network. Max and I will each get half the sats you send in, and we'll both be able to see all your comments and questions. If you want to earn sats, the best way you can do that is by following me on Twitter, where I will be posting updates of future guests that are coming on the show. Whenever you see me post an update announcing a future guest, I'll post it one day before I record with them. You can send in comments over the Lightning Network asking them questions, and I'll pick a great question that a listener sends in for that guest, and I will add that person to the show splits of that upcoming episode. Quick shout out. Today's show is sponsored by Voltage. Voltage is the industry standard and next generation provider for Lightning Network infrastructure. Today's show is also sponsored by Zebedee. That's Zebedee, and Zebedee is your portal into the world of Bitcoin gaming. We'll have more from Voltage and Zebedee later in the show. Max, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me today. We've got a lot to cover about investing and Lightning Network stuff, but why don't we start off with your background in investing, because I know you've been investing for longer than you've been in the Lightning Network space, and then what made you recognize the importance of Lightning and what made you decide, investing in the Lightning ecosystem was the right move?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Kevin. I love this podcast, so excited to be a guest. I can talk a bit about my background even pre-investing, which I think got me, really bullish on Bitcoin in the first place, and then maybe talk a bit about my investing experience. I first read about Bitcoin in 2011 when I was a student at university. And, let's just say I've always had somewhat cypherpunk leanings. I thought it was very cool. I also thought it would never be allowed to work in a million years. And so didn't buy any, totally forgot about it. Wish I had, like so many of the people in the space. And then, I had another big interest in the time, though, when I was graduating, which was in sustainability and solar energy. And so for whatever reason, I guess my sort of natural personality type is I just obsess over reading. I'm constantly reading, constantly finding new information. And I love finding exponential curves. For whatever reason, exponential curves just really get me going. And so in 2012, I was really interested in solar, and I saw that for every doubling of the cumulative capacity of solar deployed around the world, the levelized cost of energy for that solar was coming down what I thought was 20 to 30%. It really ended up being more like 40%. And so, I told all my friends and teachers and whatever at the time, this means by 2020, solar is going to be the cheapest source of energy in most parts of the world. And at the time, it was, dramatically more expensive than most fossil fuels. And so everyone was basically like, you're absolutely crazy. There's no way that can actually happen. And of course, not only did it actually happen, but the cost was much lower than people realized. And so one of the big lessons I internalized from all of that was when you see, an exponential curve, or you see, a growth curve that's increasing at a steady rate, we as humans are not good at extrapolating what that means many years out. But often adoption is going to happen faster than you think. Costs are going to come down faster than you think. And I think that's been one of the big lessons with internet, smartphones, all kinds of various technology curves. So that's kind of like what got me interested in technology and I guess sort of into investing in general. I started a company right out of school doing crowdfunding for solar and energy efficiency, totally bombed, had no business doing that, but learned a lot in the process and got really deep into solar. Through that, I joined as part of the founding team of a company called Bright, which is like Sunrunner Solar City for Mexico, residential solar finance. Moved down there in early 2015 for what was supposed to be like 6 months to a year and ended up staying for almost 5 years. That was an incredible experience for many, many reasons. And while I was living down there, I got obsessed with Bitcoin. So in maybe 2016, I started looking into Bitcoin again. Actually, I first looked at Ethereum, interestingly enough, because I was interested in decentralized energy trading. And so there were projects at the time like Grid Plus and some of these other projects. And I said, well, we have all these, solar company customers in Mexico. It would be interesting if they could trade renewable energy credits or tokenized kilowatt hours without a central clearinghouse, the CFA, the utility. And so I started looking at all these projects. I'm like, that's pretty cool. And then I saw Bitcoin didn't die. When I saw Bitcoin didn't die, my spidey sense went off immediately. I said, look, if this thing didn't die between 2011 and 2016, it's way harder than running the rest of the way. And so I became obsessed. And I had a roommate at the time who was like even more obsessive than I am. And so, this led to us doing nothing but reading about Bitcoin, watching every Andreas Antonopoulos talk. Then the 2017 bull run happened. And that's when I said, okay, this thing really will, go all the rest of the way, become the new global reserve currency, et cetera, et cetera. Through that, I got very interested in technology. I was not particularly technical. I ended up taking Justin Moon's Biddle boot camp where we built Bitcoin from scratch in Python. And that's when I was like, oh man, this thing is an Einstein or a Newton level breakthrough. If you get one of these in your lifetime, you got to go all in. So I left Bright in 2018 and knew I wanted to do something with Bitcoin. And the two big kind of light bulb moments that went off for me that I think were really important are one, I saw Bitcoin as energy-backed money. And maybe we can talk more about this as well. But for me, with my sort of background coming from the energy industry, I saw it as kilowatt-hour coin. That is a way to take electricity in the physical realm and convert it to digital scarcity. And this is something that many people had called for. Buckminster Fuller, a personal hero of mine, Tesla, Edison, Ford, not a new idea. And so when I started seeing Bitcoin as that, it helped me separate a lot of the signal from the noise. The second thing was living in Mexico. So many of my friends there were saving with dollars under the mattress. Very few had bank accounts in the U.S., only the very wealthy. And half the country has access to literally no payments network or any kind of digital wallet whatsoever. And so I quickly realized Bitcoin was going to be, or very close to having product market fit. It's just the U.S. and Europe would be the last to get it. So through that, I wanted to do something with Bitcoin and payments. Quickly realized that payments could never scale on layer one. And so that's when I found Lightning Network in 2018. And I was extremely excited about Lightning. But at that time, it was like Lalu and a few other people that are like 100x smarter than I am. So I couldn't really participate at that point. But I knew I wanted to follow it. And I did some research around payments and thought a little bit about Lightning with some early adopters there. Coinbase is a nonprofit, Give Crypto, and Bitso. Through that, I got hooked up with Version 1 Ventures, which is a generalist VC fund based between Vancouver and San Francisco. And they wanted to do a lot more in both crypto and energy and climate. And so it was a perfect fit. I joined there in late 2019 and then, invested for about a year and a half. We had an incredible run. I saw all kinds of, crypto companies. We did all the DeFi stuff. It was interesting to me, but I never thought that there were enough people running nodes in the ecosystem to make it secure. And so I was always kind of skeptical. And so that's when I knew, after following Lightning Network closely through all that period, that this is where I thought the real opportunity was. And, I had a great run there, but decided I wanted to go all in Bitcoin and Lightning and decided to start my own fund last year in September and recently, closed it out. And now we're a, $21 million seed fund investing in layer 2 and layer 3 Bitcoin startups, building the future of finance, energy, and communications.
Love it. So I want to dive into your first experience was, you said, with Ethereum. And then through your work with Version 1, you've seen all the DeFi apps and you kind of like been involved in that ecosystem. And I'd love to know more about like, what was the moment that you had this, like, was it a light bulb moment where you realized like, that's actually not the right way to build it? And this stuff might be built on Lightning instead. What was that transition like? Because I know these things happened at slightly different times, right? When you first got interested in Ethereum, Lightning was not, it wasn't an industry. So like, what was that shift like in your head?
Well, I think, it was definitely gradual. And, it came after many years of conversations and thinking about these things. And I generally had a pretty open mind, but over time, got sucked deeper and deeper into the Bitcoin ecosystem. I think one of my major concerns is all of the sort of DeFi and Ethereum entrepreneurs we spoke with, and this was pre-Solana and all that new stuff. I would always kind of just ask, like, out of curiosity, like, hey, do you run a full node for your ecosystem? And didn't find anyone that was. And that started, concerning me. I felt a little bit like Cassandra, and I was like, this whole thing in my mind is about having decentralized base layer infrastructure. And if people aren't running nodes, or it's too hard or expensive to do that, that seems like a big problem. And then when you realize the cost of running a node is getting more expensive over time because the rate of the blockchain is swelling much faster than the cost of consumer hardware is coming down to run those nodes, it seems like the problem is only getting worse. So that was like the first big knock. Second big knock was, the transition to proof of stake. I did a lot of research around that. I'm generally very skeptical of proof of stake at the base layer. I actually think Ethereum would be much better served to stick with proof of work. I think proof of work is the innovation, and that comes from my understanding of this energy-backed money concept that I talked about. And the deeper I went on that rabbit hole, the more skeptical I became of proof of stake. And then the next big thing was just understanding that Bitcoin could scale vertically like the internet. And I think the big light bulb, the true light bulb moment for me was realizing, oh my God, history rhymes pretty well. And we have almost an exact blueprint for how I think this is going to happen. And that's the internet, right? So you've got TCP/IP scaling up to HTTP, SMTP, all these application layers. It's not new. And so when that clicked for me, I said, Bitcoin is the internet of value. And why would you ever have a competing chain or settlement layer that is number two? If you have one that is the most secure, that is the most liquid, and the most decentralized, and it's exponentially growing in all of those fronts, then it's kind of like it reminded me of the old internet versus information superhighway argument. And you had very smart people like Bill Gates be like, oh, the information superhighway. It's like, no, that's crazy. Like, open always wins. And so I see Bitcoin as the internet of money. It's an open system. And when I realized that with the Lightning Network, you could scale to, take payments, I was like, okay. I started thinking of it as like the Grim Reaper meme, where he goes and knocks on every door. It was like, first, Bitcoin's coming for money. Then it's coming for payments. Next, when I learned about Taro or Taro, however you say it, Lightning Labs, coming for stable coins. And I think smart contracts or versions of that will likely come later with covenants if we ever get there, or something like that. I'm not saying I'm for or against the covenants, but I think in general, my like zoomed out investor intuition is everything comes back to Bitcoin. It's just a matter of when.
Right. Now, when you first discovered Lightning, I want to get your sense for what, let's talk about the scalability here. Did you know right away that this was going to scale to the point where it could become this next internet? It could support billions of transactions from billions of people all over the world, or was it something that just kind of came a few years later as the industry continued to grow? Because there was a lot of blockchains that also claimed, they had instant settlement, they had more throughput, they had all these things that Bitcoin supposedly didn't have. And how did you kind of how did you parse the signal and the noise there and figure out that Lightning could scale, whereas some other solutions couldn't?
Yeah, it was a gradual process. To be clear, I think I'm probably more technical than most VCs, but I'm certainly not like an engineer by any stretch of the imagination. So when I first saw all of this, it was more curiosity, interest, some intuition that, okay, this feels like it could be pretty powerful. But I think my conviction came over many years, 5 or so years, where just talking to some of the brightest minds in the industry, I started to see how it could happen sort of on top of Bitcoin. I was very convinced, and to be clear, I played a bunch of other ecosystems even prior to investing in Ethereum companies. I certainly had experience. I didn't do a ton, but I did a little shitcoining in 2017. As all of us do, trying to understand what's going on here. And there were other projects that I really liked. In fact, I still like projects like Decred as an example, which I think has objectively some features that I think are better than some of Bitcoin's features. Particularly around, for example, this idea of proof of work, hybrid proof of work, proof of stake. I thought that was kind of an interesting idea. But again, what I started realizing is, if features are really good enough, it's going to come back to Bitcoin, and features don't win. In order to revolutionize, the internet of value, to take an old technology, which is essentially, money, all the way, money and payments networks from gold to fiat, and then the payment networks on top. and really disrupt that, you need something that's at least an order of magnitude better, maybe much, 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 much better. And I quickly realized none of this stuff, even with like some like kind of minor interesting features of Bitcoin, was going to be able to surpass it. And so I'm not saying it will never happen, maybe in 100 years or 200 years, but there needs to be some new kind of like step function change. And so I'm very, very skeptical that anyone's going to be able to do that. In terms of how I really got conviction on Lightning scaling, I think there's two people that were really pivotal to me understanding that. One is Ryan Gentry at Lightning Labs. When he was at Multicoin Capital, he published a piece called like The Heretic's Guide to Web3. And it was funny because we were both kind of like in these like crypto ecosystems, but like I think he was further along than I was, but I was, quickly losing faith in all of the other ecosystems. And then I met this guy who's at a pure shitcoin fund, not to be too rough about it, but he was basically telling me actually, in like very good detail, explaining how LSATs work and some of this identity and whatnot works, that actually a lot of this activity can come back to the Lightning Network. And when I read his paper, I was just like, oh my God, of course this is it. Of course this is the internet and things will come back to this. That was the first one. And then the second one was a talk by Drew Bansal, one of co-founders of Unchained Capital, who's just like, he's the galaxy brain of galaxy brains. And he gave this talk in 2018 that just like basically predicted everything. He predicted what was going to happen with mining and the fusion of mining and energy industries. Like everyone's like so surprised. And if we want to talk about the energy stuff, we certainly can. But like I quickly realized, yep, it's only a question of will the miners buy the energy asset owners or vice versa. So he talked about that, and then he talked about Lightning scaling, in layers, and he talked about having, all the different stuff that you could build with that, and then eventually on top of Lightning, something I talked about, talk in adopting Bitcoin, what I call the Bitcoin Ouroboros, which is Bitcoin, Lightning for payments, and then eventually physical infrastructure where you can meter, buy, for example, if you want to sell bandwidth, storage, or compute. You can literally sell those resources for Satoshis. And when I realized that, I was like, oh my God, the Bitcoin Ouroboros, because then Bitcoin will be run on top of that. So anyways, I'm sure we'll talk more about some of the sci-fi stuff. But I think Ryan and Drew, I definitely have a great deal of gratitude for showing me the way, let's say.
That's amazing. I want to start off with, let's start off with just Lightning specific applications. And actually one place we can start off is the recent Stacker News AMA you did. I asked you a question on it, and the question was, which company in the Lightning space would have the largest market cap in a decade? You thought potentially Block, but you also highlighted 3 different categories of Lightning apps that you were kind of like looking at that you thought were interesting. So I thought we could kind of like go through each of those and dig into like what that investment case looks like today. These 3 categories were large and well-connected nodes on the Lightning Network, liquidity marketplaces, so things like Amboss and LN Plus and Loop, a pool, and emerging Lightning native applications, like Stacker News and Fountain, things like that. So maybe we can start with large and well-connected nodes. How do you see this evolving? Like if you're thinking about being an investor, how do you get returns by, in this like large and well-connected node space? Are you running nodes yourself? Are you finding people to run nodes for you? And like, is it a skill game? Is it a capital game? Is combination? Like, I'd love to dig into what that investment case looks like.
Yes and yes. One thing I'll say with the nodes is, let me be clear, first of all, I don't know what the future holds, right? And so I have ideas, I have theses, and I'm investing in such a way that if any of these theses are correct, hopefully, our fund, Hivemind, is going to be very well positioned. But I think it's still very early, and no one really knows how it's going to play out, which is what makes this so exciting, right? Again, I think watching the internet is kind of how the internet developed, is our best mental model for that. But it's anyone's guess. So the first category is well-connected routing nodes. Now, this is something that I've debated with very, very smart people that I respect. And again, I think we could take either side of this argument. But one analogy that I've been thinking about more recently is thinking about the Lightning Network as sort of analogous to the railroads. And so, when we go back to the Gilded Age in the United States and the building of railroads and all of that, obviously some of the wealthiest people in human history came from that boom. And I think this is similar to that. It's a transportation network. As Lightning Labs always says, it's money tubes. Bitcoin is money. This is like the railroads or the tubes to send the money around the world. And so I think that, I think it seems pretty intuitive and obvious to me that if you own the Grand Central or many of the, major hubs or routing kind of rail stations for that, seems like that's going to be pretty valuable. I think the debate is how much staying power these rail hubs or these routing hubs are going to have, and also how decentralized routing is going to be in the future. So I'll take each of those one by one. One question is, so if I were to take, the bear case on having staying power with these major nodes today, it would be that unlike physical railroads, it's much cheaper to lay lightning track, i.e. it's purely digital. All I need to do is open the channel with a Bitcoin transaction. Probably true. So it's probably much easier to build lightning railroads than it was physical railroads. However, no one knows what the future cost of laying track is going to be, right? And so it's cheap today. The mempool is empty. But if you see a possible world where the entire global economy comes over to Bitcoin, then who knows how expensive it is to get a transaction in the mempool, right, or to get a transaction through. And so, I could see easily a case where it's thousands of dollars, maybe much more, to lay some of this track, in which case it's going to be much more expensive than people realize to build up some of these well-connected nodes. I think there's also just a lot around brand. Like I thought it was interesting, for example, zero routing fee, I think just kind of went down to start up a new node, and because people knew him and trusted him, he was able to build that up again pretty quickly, again, in a low fee environment. But I think brand does matter a lot. I think also connections among a lot of the big players matter. So if if you're well hooked up in sort of like the legacy financial system, some of these companies like Rivers and Krakens or whatever, I think they're going to be pretty well positioned for that. So I think you could take either side of that. But in general, if we're taking the entire payment network of the world and moving it over to Lightning Network, I think it's just like pretty obvious if you're routing a meaningful percentage of those payments, it's going to be valuable. Now, I think, and we'll touch on this more later as well, but another interesting question is, what is the value created versus value captured there, right? And this is something I'm sure we'll go into much greater detail on, but very high level, there is a world where we create a ton of value. By that I mean we basically route payments for very, very, very low fees, and so everyone in the world benefits from that. It's free, instant, frictionless commerce. But then you say, well, those nodes, if they're routing at such a low fee because the market clearing price is so low, well, then how do they make money? Like, what's their take rate? And I think one interesting model to consider around that is that the take rate could be substantially lower. Like, let's say, whatever it is today, a couple of percentage points, maybe it's only 0.1 percentage points or whatever. I think it's probably higher than that, but who knows? But when you have 8 billion people one day that are able to engage in global commerce, the vast majority of whom today are just completely shut out, and you have all of these new different kinds of commerce that are enabled by the Lightning Network, things like Stacker News, et cetera, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, then all of a sudden there's another argument that says even if our take rate is much lower, if we can increase the pie of global commerce by orders of magnitude, well, even a much lower take rate is still potentially more profitable than some of the Visas and MasterCards today. So that's my kind of general bull case. I'll pause there because I know there's 2 more categories, but yeah.
Yeah, so it could be a bit of a volume game. It could get to the point where we have this massive pie and it's okay that the take rate's smaller because there's so many more payments flowing through.
Exactly.
How important is skill? Because we talked about brand and reputation. What about the actual skill of a routing node operator? Is that going to be an important feature in determining which routing nodes are successful and which ones are not?
It certainly is today. I don't foresee that changing anytime soon. To be clear, I run a cloud node, I run an Umbrel node as well, and I'm pretty hands off. So I would say I'm a objectively terrible node operator. But even still, I get a little bit of routing. It's kind of cool. It's kind of a fun little thing. But yeah, again, it remains to be seen with developments in the network what the scarce skill set is going to be. But my guess is that there will still be a decent amount of skill. The other thing that I would just mention that I also should touch on is it also matters a lot how decentralized routing is. And so if we get much more of a hub and spoke model where vast majority of payment volume is flowing through some of these big nodes, well, it's going to be hard to compete against them because of economies of scale, because of the skill they have, et cetera, et cetera. However, if some of this other stuff, and this is kind of stretching my expertise, but I listened to your podcast with Renee talking about some of the multi-path payments and stuff like that. If there's a world where it's a lot easier to split payments and make it easier for smaller nodes to route, maybe more passively, then maybe that's kind of a shift more in the kind of democratized routing world. At this stage, I don't think anyone knows. It's kind of anyone's guess.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you worry at all on the topic of decentralization and maybe potentially a set of like really large nodes being built on Lightning that control a lot of the payment flow or have a lot of the payments come through them? Do you worry about centralization in that regard? Is there a point at which it could get too centralized and actually start to erode people's confidence in the Lightning Network and its vision, or is that an issue at all to you?
Not really. I mean, I think that the key with Lightning Network and what I love about it is open. It's open. Anyone can run a node. So I think it's almost certain that you're going to have a big portion of the network that's going to be, very kind of like, KYC, like let's call it completely regulated. And that's going to be, one block or whatever is running big nodes. Like they're not going to be, doing some darknet stuff or whatever. And that's fine. And those kind of, and I'm sure they're only going to have channels open with, the Krakens and whatever of the world and whatnot, and totally cool. But I think the key with the Lightning Network is even if there is a decent amount of quote unquote centralization, which is a good thing for consumers in terms, or could be a good thing in terms of price and the economies of scale, is that you don't have to use them. If you and your buddies all want to set up umbrellas and say, actually, we're willing to pay a higher price because we want privacy or because we want to support, for example, the plebs that are providing liquidity to El Salvador or whatever, that's your choice, and no one can stop you from doing that. So again, I think this kind of comes back to why I love Bitcoin and Lightning Network so much, and especially compared to some other stuff like even side chains or whatever that I'm probably not as big a fan of. It's because it's open. It needs the key is anyone can run a node, and no one can force you to use it or
not. Now, from your perspective, as an investor and running a VC fund, how do you then think about finding those venture style returns in this category?
Well, I'll answer that two ways. The first way is I truly believe that we have a once in a lifetime opportunity here. And I truly believe that our fund could be one of the top returning funds of the decade. That's certainly my intention and my goal. Will we outperform Bitcoin? I don't know. And I don't know if any investment on earth will outperform Bitcoin. That's a very interesting debate to have. I'm fortunate to have LPs who, for the most part, are probably pretty long Bitcoin already. And so I would tell everyone, highly recommend being long Bitcoin first. So I don't think it's necessarily, an issue either way. Having said that, I can certainly paint the picture where we can outperform Bitcoin. And I think that counts on two factors. Number one, how much room does Bitcoin have left to run? If you believe that the entire economy is going to get repriced to Bitcoin, which I do, and you don't know how long that's going to take, who knows? Let's say we're aggressive and say it's going to happen in a decade. Even in that world, at some point, Bitcoin reaches an upper limit. Now, I don't think it ever maxes out because, if it's essentially GDP coin or it's as I said, it's energy backed money, right? And so any system is calories in, calories out, kilowatt hours in, kilowatt hours out. And so as humanity continues to harness more energy and use that to create new wealth, the price of Bitcoin will go up forever is the idea. But maybe that ends up happening, is just kind of like tracking GDP. So maybe it's like 2 or 3% growth per year or something like that. And so, it depends on, how long it takes us to get to that point. But my point is Bitcoin's not going to have 100 or 1,000x forever. So maybe there's 100x left. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And to be clear, good venture returns for a full fund historically have been 3x. 10x would be considered quite good. 20x would be considered historic or whatever, or, way up there. And so if you could 100x just putting in Bitcoin, going to be really tough to beat that. Will that happen or not? That's debatable. But the second thing that I would say is that you have to remember the Bitcoin and Lightning Network. Well, the Bitcoin is two things, right? You have the asset and you have the network. And so as you think about the network, I think about all the new companies that are going to be built on top of it, just like the internet. The core part of my thesis is that today we're at around 200 million users. That's where the internet was in 97. From 97 to 2007, the internet scaled from 200 million to 2 billion users. And so in that time, you had, Google, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, all of these incredible web companies. And like, honestly, it was hard to miss as an investor. And if you got one of the really big ones, then you could post some pretty historic returns. And so the way I look at it is, if we can catch some of those 1,000Xers, that's why I love to go so early, and I'll talk more about this as well, is I want to give myself a chance to catch the 1,000Xers, then I think we can outperform Bitcoin. And so that's what I'm in the game of doing.
Right. Is it fair to say, when you're talking about the internet, is it fair to say that we have if we're trying to make a comparison here, you couldn't monetize the internet when it first came out, right? You could monetize some of the apps built on top, but the pipes that send all this information was not available. You just couldn't get a return on it. Is that maybe the way I'm thinking about it now is Bitcoin that internet that can be monetized? And then on top of that, there's also going to be applications that can also be monetized. Is that the right way to think about it?
I think so. Infrastructure and applications.
Got it. Okay, let's go to the second category, liquidity marketplaces. And this is something where you have players like Amboss, you have players like LN Plus, Lightning Pool, you have liquidity ads from Core Lightning. And this seems to be, my take on it right now is that it seems to be like it's a network effect waiting to form. Like, we have a few variations of these marketplaces, but it seems like there's going to be strong network effects that develop over time. Do you think this is going to be a kind of a winner take most market? Kind of like if you look to like DeFi, maybe like a Uniswap, where they kind of like aggregate a lot of the liquidity on DeFi?
Maybe. I think there's going to be at least two big players, and I could see making the case for more. So to take a step back, why do I think liquidity marketplaces are a big deal? Roy, the founder of Breeze, in which I'm an investor, and I love that company. Roy has put out some great articles around, like, one of his articles is actually called "The Lightning Network is the Liquidity Network," and I think it's really important for people to understand what that means. So, not to go all the way into how Lightning works, but essentially, when you send payments on the Lightning Network, I like his example of it's an abacus with beads. So, say I want to route a payment, to our mutual friend Keon. I don't have a channel open with him, but I have a channel open with you. You have a channel with Keon. I send some beads your way. You send some beads his way. You take a small, fee for routing. If he was just coming on the network and all the beads, he only had a channel with you and all the beads were on your side, then that's a huge problem because he can't send out a payment. And, I highly encourage anyone to read, more about how this works. There's a great book called Mastering the Lightning Network by Andreas Antonopoulos, Lalo, and Renee. You can learn more about this. But the high level takeaway is liquidity is the scarce resource in the Lightning Network, the beads that you're shooting back and forth, right? And particularly for new users that are coming on the network. And so that is the scarce resource, and typically the scarce resource is the valuable thing. And so marketplaces for the valuable thing, are going to be valuable. That's kind of my very, very simple take on it. And so I think, it's very, very early. I think it's way too early to call any kind of winners. We're in, inning one. I see a couple of interesting things forming. So I think in terms of early network effect, I am an investor in like Network Plus, and I invest there because I started to see that network effect forming. I think, on their site, they're claiming 760 BTC volume done, something like that. It's insane. And so they're, I think, have some pretty strong early network effects, certainly among the plebs. In some ways, it's kind of like, it's not the perfect analogy. It's more peer-to-peer. It's not the perfect Craigslist analogy. I know Amboss is kind of using that as well right now, which is a bit more of a market buy and sell. But that's certainly where the plebs are sourcing liquidity for now. And part of it's because it's free and it remains to be seen if they can be monetized, et cetera, et cetera. But it does have early network effects, is my view. And so I think that's really interesting. And a site like that, I think it's also important to understand who's using it and why. And so what a lot of people forget here is that, early Bitcoiners that got here in 2011, these people are institutions themselves. Many of them are billionaires. And so they're sitting on tremendous amounts of capital. And if they got in that early, they were highly technical. And so they can certainly run their own nodes. They can certainly manage liquidity, et cetera, et cetera. And so for folks like that, I think they kind of prefer some of these easy to use sites, don't require, a whole lot of information or whatever. And so I think Lightning Network Plus has just been huge for them. And that's, I can't confirm this, but that's why I would guess why it has such early strong network effects.
Right.
I also, sorry?
Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, I was also going to say though, I love a product like Lightning Labs Pool. I'm also an investor in Lightning Labs, and I think for them, especially as they start onboarding more institutions, and obviously there's a bunch of exciting stuff with Taro or Taro, however you say it. Like, I think that Lightning Labs Pool is like a pretty obvious answer for some of the like older financial institutions and the real huge amounts of capital that they're going to bring to bear. And so I would also be pretty bullish on them. I also like a lot Amboss. Their new liquidity marketplace. I like that it's also peer to peer, and they make it easy just to click buy. I think them adding the API was extremely smart. I think a lot of people are going to build cool apps around that. In fact, I saw one in the Bitcoin Plus Plus hackathon that I liked a lot, and so I think that's awesome. And then I think you're going to see new players come into the space that basically build aggregators on top of all of these marketplaces and try and like kind of route that liquidity for you. So the analogy there in DeFi, I guess, a little bit would be like Uniswap became the dominant DEX or decentralized exchange. And then you had, I forgot all the names now, like 1X or something like that. You had all these things on top of it that were the aggregation layer, remains to be seen in the long run where value will accrue if these ecosystems survive. But I think the same thing here for liquidity. And so, and then the peer-to-peer liquidity ads from, C Lightning, I think, or Blockstream and Core Lightning is cool too.
Yeah. So now, if you had to pick just one, I know I'm asking you to pick favorites here, but if you had to find one of these liquidity marketplaces and said, I'm going to put everything behind that, I'm going to back that as the dominant liquidity marketplace in a decade, what's your sense today?
Man, it's early. I mean, again, I think the network effects for Lightning Network Plus are very strong early on, but not too early that they can't get disrupted. I think Lightning Labs just has the best team by far. I mean, I'm a huge fan of LM Plus, but I don't think there's any question that Lalu and the team that Elizabeth has assembled over there is just A++. So I would not bet against Lightning Labs, that's for sure. And I think particularly for onboarding, some of the larger institutions. But again, I kind of see like there's a world where there's certain players, like there are certain features that you may or may not be able to offer depending on who you're catering to. And so I don't think it's going to be winners takes all, depending on who you are, what you're willing to share or not.
And do you think that if we look at all these liquidity marketplaces and compare them to, let's say, Web 2 marketplaces for various goods and services, those have traditionally been pretty good businesses. Is it fair to say that the returns for an investor and the margins for these businesses could be comparable?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, my guess is that, again, because this is open, margins will probably be lower in general. I don't know that for a fact. I haven't thought much about this, but my guess would be margins are generally lower because of it's open. And so who knows, maybe at the end of the day, these marketplaces are actually like not valuable at all. And maybe just like peer-to-peer liquidity ads, like brings everything to zero. I could totally see that too. So too early to say. My hunch is in general with open systems, lower take rates, but larger pies.
I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Voltage. Voltage is the industry standard for Lightning Network infrastructure. Creating layer 2 applications and services on top of Bitcoin starts with Voltage, where you can spin up nodes, get access to liquidity, optimize your node, and much more. Voltage is leading the way as the next generation provider of Lightning Network infrastructure. And if you want to get a free trial and start using Voltage today, you can do so at voltage.cloud. Okay, let's go into the third bucket now. And this is emerging Lightning native applications for making payments. What kind of payments are you envisioning here in this third bucket?
So I think about them, maybe let's categorize them in two sub buckets. One is kind of replacing conventional payment networks, and the two is creating new categories of payments. And so I think both are very interesting. I think it's easier to sort of invest today against, at least initially replacing old payments. And so that's things like anytime you see an international payment, particularly things like remittances. I mean, I think it's well documented how usurious and exorbitant these charges are, particularly for people that are, very poor in the global south. It's like, it's not right. And so I think that when you see international payment providers and remittance providers for places like, some of the big corridors like US to Mexico, US to Philippines, some of these places, I think that's like a very obvious area that's super ripe for disruption. And so I think that's kind of like step one is any kind of international payment. If you're having to pay a high fee to send money overseas or across borders, Lightning Network can do that for virtually free, and it's going to eat all of the closed payment networks. Nicholas Berthe at Galoy, they're one of my portfolio companies. He put out a piece like a year and a half ago. This is the other thing besides Ryan and Drew's talks that got me so pumped in Lightning Network, where he just explained how this instant global free payment network, or nearly free payment network, is going to eat ACH, Swift, MasterCard, Visa, all of those. And I totally buy that. So I think step one is replacing all of the existing international payments. Now, step two is where I get even more excited. And if you guys will indulge me here, this is the classic skeuomorphic thing, which Chris Dixon loves to write about. And by the way, I think he's very smart. I just kind of replace all of his Web3 stuff with Bitcoin, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And so he's always talking about like, it was dope to put the New York Times online, but it was much doper to put Twitter online. And so when you have a new kind of application that straight up was not possible prior to this new technological primitive being available, in this case, the Lightning Network, that is where you're going to see some of the wild stuff. And so I think we're very, very early there. But the examples that I love today, I'm a huge Stacker News fan. In fact, go ahead and pop this guy on.
Well, the
got my
official
Stacker News swag. There you go, baby.
Love
I'm a
it.
huge Stacker News fan. And I think it's so cool because it's like Reddit or Stack Overflow or Quora or whatever, but you upvote with value. And so I'm extremely bullish on this company. Very proud investor. You look at some of the valuations for some of these other information exchanges or whatever you want to call them, and they're very high, but it's just like it's just upvoting, right? Which is not Sybil resistant. There's no easy way of integrating commerce inside. With Stacker News, the ability to upvote with value is incredible. Now, when I say I'm speaking with real value, real money, when I say this thing is worth something to me or it's valuable to me. And I think what I love about this category of application is that it opens up perhaps the thing I'm most excited about, which is the ability to earn, right? Now, if you look around the world, let's say we're very fortunate to be born in places like the US and Canada where we can have good job opportunities. Like even a worse situation, we're still going to have a food and roof over our head. But like if you're born somewhere in Africa and Latin America, Southeast Asia, being able to earn a few dollars a day online might be like dramatically life-changing, better than what you have in your home country. And so the ability to curate content or create content and get paid directly peer-to-peer is just an absolute game changer, and no one has seen where this is all going to go. Similarly, I'm very excited about Fountain for podcasting, which we're on there right now. Breeze obviously has their amazing podcasting app. I think this is just the beginning. Like I want to see this applied in music. I'm a musician myself. I rap, and I've always wanted to see a peer-to-peer music platform, and a Wave Lake, and some guys are playing with it. But I think we're very early there. And perhaps the last thing I'd like to mention here is kind of a fourth bucket of companies I'm excited about, which I think is going to enable the third bucket. I think what we're missing today, we've only seen a few of these apps because it's hard to roll your own. When you look at someone like Keon from Stacker News, he's just an exceptionally brilliant guy who, in addition to building his app, he's running his own node infrastructure. He knows how to handle all of that on the back end. And most developers just want to build their app. And so I think the fourth category that I'm really excited about right now, and if anyone's building this, please reach out, is I want to see more APIs that say, ideally non-custodially, how can I integrate Lightning payments into my news or podcast app with 1 or 2 lines of code? I think that's the missing piece right now.
Yeah, that I can see that being like a game changer for just getting more people on board, because when we look at like the penetration of specifically podcasts, because we have those numbers, there's about 7,000 podcasts that are Lightning enabled today. And you could have a flick of a switch at Spotify or Apple or someone like that, or even a smaller app that's trying to compete and trying to become a Spotify or an Apple. If they can just turn that on in one flick, all of a sudden you can like light up an entire section of this like podcasting economy and give them access to payments. One other thing I want to bring up is that you did a Stacker News AMA the other day. And if anyone listening to this has not seen it, definitely check it out. But I want to dive into like the numbers here, because there were a few dozen people that commented, gave you questions, you responded back. They sent you about, I think, 27,000 sats. So we're looking at with Bitcoin price changing all the time, it's hard to know exactly, but I think that's $5 or $10, something like that, from a few
Yeah.
dozen people. I think daily there's a few hundred people checking in on the app. There's maybe 1,000 that are kind of like viewing the app, and already you're seeing you earn like $5 or $10 for hosting an AMA. How
Yeah.
big do you think that grows? Like, if we get to a stage where you look at like some of the influencers online today, if I don't know if Warren Buffett or LeBron James or some like global icon or Cristiano Ronaldo decides to do like an AMA on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, like what could they earn if everyone had Lightning enabled wallets? What's your like estimate of like how big that could be?
A lot. I mean, I am clearly not an influencer, and I don't really want to be one.
You're
So,
a Lightning
the fact that
influencer.
I don't know about that, but the fact that I got even $5 to $10 from a small community is pretty cool. I mean, for people that actually have fans and put time into it, I mean, the sky's the limit. I don't see. I mean, let's take something that I do think about a little bit more, which is music, right? I love music, and I would love to be able to go peer to peer to all my favorite musicians. And, I'm not like a super expert on this, but you look at like how the Spotify model works or whatever. And basically, we're all paying our 5, 10, $20 a month, whatever it is. And then most of that gets pooled. I'm sure the labels take their cut. There's all these middlemen, right? Like any industry, there's a lot of middlemen that are just kind of like sucking the value. That's going to get completely disrupted by Bitcoin Lightning. And so in those industries, then in order to sign and get some of the big catalogs on there, my understanding is that they basically pay peanuts or pennies to like the long tail of artists, or even like the medium sized artists, and it's basically just going to the labels and like the few really 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 big artists on there. And so that sucks, because if you're an artist, how are you supposed to make a living? Most of them have to do it with touring and merch, and especially in the pandemic, that was really hard to do. And so I'm a big fan of independent music. Some of my favorite bands, I love like this band, the Brian Jonestown Massacre. Anton Newcomb's been doing this forever, like completely direct to fans, and he kept all of his own catalog, and that's its own kind of rabbit hole. But I was thinking a lot about this recently with Black Star, so Mos Def and Talib Kweli, or Yassine Bey and Talib Kweli. They released a new album a couple of weeks ago, and it was amazing. And I've been waiting for the new Black Star album since I was 8 years old, and so they didn't put it on any of the streaming platforms, and they can get away with that because they have enough of a cult following. Like the people that like them really like them, and so they're going to be willing to pay it. But to be honest, I was pretty frustrated because it was like they put it behind some like bizarre it wasn't even a paywall. They put it on some like podcasting app where you had to sign up and give your credit card information, some new recurring SaaS fee, and in general, I think SaaS is just annoying. Like I hate that a lot of the business models to try and get you to like essentially trick you into forgetting you're paying. And yeah, it just kind of like it just pissed me off. And I love these artists. I would have happily paid 10, 20, 50, maybe even $100. Or like if they had given me the option to donate, because I love them. I love that music, and I get a lot of value out of that music. And this is kind of the Adam Curry value for value thing, and it's true. And so I am so excited to see in like that industry, people are going to be experimenting, and Wave Lake is doing this a little bit. I've actually got a few tracks on there already, and the ability just to go direct, peer to peer. I think this could usher in, a golden age for artists. Like imagine someone, who's middle class, maybe even lower class, and now they can earn a couple grand a month. That's the goal. If you can get a couple grand a month, enough to pay your rent, then you don't have to do some drone job. Instead, you can create art that some people are going to find beautiful. And if you've read, I'm sure you probably have, or maybe some of the audience, Kevin Kelly put out this article 10 years ago or something called 1,000 True Fans. And his whole thing was, if you can get 1,000 true fans as an artist or a content creator, well, then you can earn a middle class living. And that was awesome back then, and he was right. But that also required selling merch and shows and blah, blah, blah. And so now I think his thesis is, I think he was right, but early with how right he could be. And now with peer-to-peer Lightning enabled payments, I think you're just going to see this blossoming of the creative class. And I think, people in quote unquote crypto land talk about it. And there's, again, completely wrong rails, completely wrong business models, right idea. And so I think this is the real creator economy and what's going to enable.
How important do you think is the fact that you can send a payment of any size on Lightning, how much of an impact is that going to have on the creator economy's blossoming?
It's going to be huge. I mean, I don't know exactly how it's going to play out, which is why I'm so excited as an investor. This is like what I want to watch. But there was like a tweet storm. I think Ryan mentioned this in that article of his that I mentioned from a couple of years ago, where he put out a tweet from, I guess, Brian Armstrong of all people, who was tweeting about, I forgot the labeling of this, but like essentially when you made it really cheap, it used to be really hard if you wanted to do communication. You had to send like a physical handwritten letter, and so that's really expensive and time intensive, and so not many letters got sent. And then the telegraph made it a little bit easier, and then the telephone, and then it got to the point with email and WhatsApp and whatnot, where people are sending stuff nonstop. So it literally went up orders of magnitude. I think the same thing's gonna happen with payments. As the cost of payments keeps coming down, like every new threshold, every time it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Now it's essentially free for micropayments. We don't even know what that's going to do, but it's going to be orders of magnitude more payments for sure.
Now, how important then is the other component? Because I think there's two things happening. One is it's basically free, or it scales down to zero payment size. You can send any amount. The other is that it's now instant. And like those are two things that are happening at the same time. So how do you weigh the importance of the instant payments? Is that going to be as big of an important factor as the cost of payments, or is the cost of payments more important?
I think they're both huge. And I think, I don't know which one's going to be bigger. I guess it depends on the use case. Maybe my intuition tells me instant's even bigger in some ways because there's new things you can do. For example, I've been talking with friends. One of my friends, David King, has been talking for a long time about, hey, and I think John Cantrell has been talking about this as well. What if we could have like, a global kind of like game show where anyone anywhere in the world can like participate and get paid out in sats at the same time? And all of a sudden that means like, wait a second, like I can be playing against a friend who lives in Bahrain or wherever, like some random country I've never been to. That's completely new activity. So I think it's going to be huge. I think the third thing, in addition to, the size of the payments I can send, the speed of the payments I can send, is the programmable nature of payments. And so this is also going to be huge. A lot of people have just started playing with this. There's like Lightning Escrow and some new kind of primitives that are being built around that. But having this be programmable is also huge.
Right. I think the game show idea is great. I know Zebedee is working on, like they have integrations with, they put like sats into the fabric of their games. So you can like shoot someone in Counter-Strike and have like sats pop up and like chase people around in like a Mario Kart style thing. So I think there's a lot to be built there. I want to dive into now the topic. We touched on this a little bit, but creating and capturing value. What do you think when we look back on Lightning in the next decade or so? What applications do you think will create the most value for the world? Not necessarily capture, but just like change people's lives the most. What are the most impactful applications for Lightning?
And with the caveat that, again, the thing I'm most looking forward to is the unexpected, what I can't foresee. The two obvious ones to me are remittances. If I'm someone who's working extremely hard here in the U.S. to send a couple $100s back to my family in Mexico, and now I can get it there instantly for 10% cheaper, that's a really big deal. The second one is the ability to earn. And in addition to the products we talked about, Paul Utoy at Stackwork, who I know you've had on the podcast recently, I think he's kind of the original thought leader here, and he's building some incredible stuff. And yeah, I agree with him. I think the ability for anyone to earn, I think something that our world needs more of is tools to let people build their own futures and take control of their lives. And if you're born into a place with spotty internet, non-existing payment systems, bad currencies, you just don't have a shot. I mean, just like no matter what you do, how hard you work, you just don't have a shot. And so I think giving billions of people a shot, a chance to participate, is just going to, how many new Steve Jobs are trapped in a country where, for no fault of their own, they can't participate and try their idea? And so I think the ability to earn online and the ability to receive remittances are the two that interest me most.
Right. Yeah. One cool thing that I'm working on with this show is I had Mash's CEO Jared Newsonoff on last episode, and we talked about how I'm going to have a section on my website where I paywall a transcript and anyone can read through a transcript. So of this full episode, people can listen in, or they can just read the transcript, pay over Lightning. But what I didn't say to everyone was that the transcript is going to be created by thousands of people all over the world working for Sats. And that's something that Paul Etoy is helping out with right now. So every time you read a transcript, I hope this will be out in the next week or so, but every time you read one of these transcripts, there will have been hundreds or potentially thousands of people that contributed to getting that, like a little audio clip of 3 seconds of me or you talking, correctly writing it down and like compiling it into this document that is already, I've seen some of the early versions, it's already way better than you could get from like some AI auto translate app. So I'm really pumped about that. I just think that's like, anyone can actually make a living off this stuff. I think that's going to unlock some really big doors.
That's amazing. Yeah, shout out to Paul. He's seen this before anybody else, so that's amazing.
Yeah, very, very early. Okay, I want to highlight one other comment you made on your Stacker News AMA earlier this week. I think I asked you how many people will be making Lightning transactions every day in a decade. Mm-hmm. And you said a number that just blew me away. You said 2 billion people. What's your vision there?
Over 2
Over 2 billion, yes. Okay, so it blew me away even more. What's your vision there for how these people will be interacting with Lightning, what kind of applications they'll be using, and how frequently they'll be making payments, and for what?
So I kind of want to go back to what I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, which is, humans are very bad at seeing exponential curves in adoption. And, I look, again, a part of my thesis is just modeling my investing on the first wave of the internet. And so 97, 200 million users. 2007, over 2 billion users. So when you said a decade, I think that's just like, let's just say it's 1 for 1 with the internet. I think the reality is it's going to be bigger than that, and it's going to happen much faster. Because when the internet was, coming to fruition, well, obviously there was no internet, and there was no infrastructure, there was no smartphone. And so the Lightning Network in Bitcoin can actually scale much faster than the internet did, because it's built on top of the internet. It's a layer, it's a protocol stack built on top of an existing protocol stack that already has wide distribution with billions of users through smartphones. And so, high level, I'm just, I'm a fan of these curves, and I would never ever take the under on an exponential. So that's the very high level. I think that there's a lot of debates on exactly what that world looks like. Is there a world where we can have 2 billion plus users in a decade that have their own nodes or their own keys? That's trickier. I think it's possible. I think there's some necessary technological advancements that need to happen. I know Roya Breeze is working a lot around this, how you can have your own keys just on your phone. I don't think you're going to be running a full routing node on your phone. I think that's probably not realistic. But could you just have your keys and the rest of it run on the cloud? Maybe. Could you, have, your Lightning wallet integrated into other super apps or services you use like Twitter? And ideally, there's a way to do that non-custodially. I think that's possible too. I think the other possibility is, I'm not 100% sold on that. And you may have some other, in order to open that many channels, there are some theoretical limitations on how many of those you could open just like per block today. And so you might have some new breakthroughs with things like channel factories, or even some new technologies that people haven't thought of before, shared UTXOs, et cetera, et cetera. Then all of those kind of have like a spectrum in terms of security model and kind of value they deliver for people. The other option is kind of the other end of that spectrum, which is you could have 2 billion plus users on centralized services. I know this is controversial, and a lot of people would say, well, that's not Bitcoin, that's not Lightning. And, philosophically, I agree with them. But in reality, I do think centralized players, companies like Strike, companies like, at least today, Pouch and Neutron Pay, which are both remittance apps focused on Philippines and Vietnam, respectively, Ibex Mercado, which is focused in Latin America. These guys are custodial today. And honestly, I would prefer non-custodial, but at the same time, I feel like they can still offer experiences that pass on zero cost or close to zero cost payments to their customers. And that's still life changing. I don't think that's the worst thing to happen. Then you also have this middle ground where you have companies like Beloy that are working on essentially community banking, or you can think of it as the next wave of credit unions, where maybe you do have some trust model and it's not purely non-custodial, but the people that manage the treasury are people you know and with whom you have recourse, because it's, the mayor and like councilman of your city or town. And if they, fuck you over, like, right where they live. And so that's a different trust model as well. And so I don't know how it's all going to play out. I'm investing personally along all three channels. If I put on my Bitcoiner hat and just like human freedom hat, I hope it's non-custodial. But
Right.
at the same time, I think we have to be realistic and open to all.
Yeah. There was an interesting comment you made a little while ago about the exponential curve of the internet, and how now with Bitcoin we're kind of building on top of something that is already, because we have the internet, we can now build on Bitcoin faster and we can get faster Bitcoin adoption. Does the same thing happen when we think about Bitcoin and Lightning? Like, Lightning is being built at a time when we already have maybe, I don't know, 100 plus million Bitcoiners. And like the growth of Lightning maybe can happen even faster than the growth of Bitcoin, because we have this massive base of people who already have Bitcoin. All they need to do is like set up a wallet or something like that, or download an app and just move the Bitcoin over, and it's like a seamless process. Is that realistic?
100%. And I think, I'll throw out two things. I mean, Lynn Alden put out a great article a while ago about network effects, talking about Bitcoin's network effects and Lightning Network's network effects, and how those are actually like a virtuous cycle with each other. 100% believe that. And then if there's a talk that Ryan and Drew actually gave together at, not this year, not the most recent, but the Bitcoin Miami prior, where they had kind of talked about scaling, Bitcoin Lightning in layers. And I forget the numbers, but they actually have a slide where they literally look at this. They say, well, how fast did internet adoption go? How fast did smartphone adoption go? How fast did Bitcoin adoption go? How fast is Lightning adoption? And Lightning is the fastest of all. Bitcoin was faster than internet. Lightning is faster than Bitcoin to date. So I don't even think it's a question. I think it's just like empirically correct. And just to like maybe make this very real for people. When I went to college, I enrolled as a university freshman in 2008. I had a dumb phone. Maybe I was a little behind the curve, but I had a flip phone in 2008. 2009 or 2010, I guess my sophomore year, I got my first smartphone. And obviously I never looked back, although occasionally I wish I had never done that, but that's a separate rabbit hole. And that happened really fast. Like literally, I remember overnight it went from no one has a smartphone to, oh my God, everyone has a smartphone. That was like a year, or at least in my world, it looked like a year. And maybe in developing markets it took a little bit longer. Maybe it was faster because they leapfrogged. I don't know. But the point is, it went really, really fast. And that was with a physical technology. Like you actually had to buy and move atoms for a phone. This is a digital technology. Way faster. It's going to happen way faster.
Right. I like that. I mean, now your 2 billion, over 2 billion prediction doesn't seem that crazy anymore, I have to say.
I think it's conservative.
Yeah. Okay. I want to spend a little time talking about investing specifically, and investing in the Lightning startup ecosystem. Maybe we can start with founders. How do you identify founders? Because you got meetings with all sorts of people all day long. How do you know when you found a good founder, someone who's going to build something that's going to have a real big impact on the world?
I mean, I think this is more art than science. It's one of those things. It's like when you know, and there's times when it's definitely not the case for you. There's times when you think maybe, and you see someone maybe it's a little bit younger that's not quite there yet, but you could see the potential in them moving forward. And then there's occasionally cases where you're just like, yep, this person has it. And I don't know what to say other than like it's rare. When you feel it, you get excited and you commit money quickly. I think for me, I was very lucky in that prior to starting my own fund, I got well, first of all, I've been in and around startups for a long time, and so over a decade. A lot of my good friends from college. My co-founder of my first company, was the second engineer at Benchling, which is now a major unicorn in sort of like bioinformatics, GitHub for bioinformatics. I have another one of my best friends, like the CEO of a major biotech company. A bunch of my other friends are VCs. When I was at Bright, we were we were actually Y Combinator's first investment in solar, and in Mexico, we were backed by first round of Felicis, some of the best funds in Silicon Valley. And so I've been very lucky to kind of be in and around that ecosystem for a long time and kind of see the quality of founders there. And then when I joined version 1, I have so much gratitude to Boris and Andrew. Just first of all, incredible people and just A plus world class VCs. And so I got to learn a lot from them. And during the pandemic, it was actually anything it was extremely exhausting. But we had so many meetings, and so I just got tons of reps, hundreds if not thousands of reps, and I've seen all kinds of companies. I've seen from our portfolio, we have multiple unicorns now, and so I've seen those founders. I've seen founders that we funded at day one, founders that we passed on, the deliberations that we had. And so that was just really, I guess, like an incredible school and learning opportunity for me. And so that I think helped kind of calibrate me a lot. These days, I mean, I'm still meeting lots of people all the time. And, I'd say it's rare that you get the spidey sense. It happens. Stacker News is one of the ones it happened for, but it's rare. And so sometimes what you'll see is with the founders, you'll see them maybe, especially if they're on the younger side, and they're not there yet, but you can kind of see in the future their potential, and you hope that you can help coach and support, and and look, it's also just luck. Let's be real. At the end of the day, you hope you get lucky too.
Yeah. So now let's go from, you have the founders, you first try and identify a good founder, then the founder goes on and builds their product. They eventually have to get to a point of product market fit. How do you identify when a founder has reached product market fit? And are there any examples of that in the Lightning ecosystem today where you think they've found the product market fit?
When you have product market fit. You don't have to ask. And because you see a hockey stick growth chart and it's not fake. There's no ads going on. It's growing very fast, and you can't keep up with demand from your users. And it's rare. And I think, I think Stacker News, again, not to harp too much on this one, but if you look on Kian's Twitter account, he put out some charts recently. That's early product market fit. I think it's still within a very kind of tight niche, which is Bitcoiners, but I'm making the bet that we can grow outside of that at some point, which I think we will. But those are organic hockey stick numbers. I think that I'm not privy to any of their insider data, and I'm not an investor in these companies, at least yet. But I think it seems like there's pretty strong product market fit for some of the later stage Lightning companies like Voltage, that's offering kind of node as a service. Liquidity for gaming, that seems like it probably has it. I would guess. Again, I don't have any insider info, just guessing. And Strike might have it. I think with Lightning Labs, there's certainly product market fit in people using their software. I mean, that's clear to me. The business model obviously is going to come, on top of that. But I think the people using Lightning nodes for sure. Umbrel, I think, had it early on. I'm also an angel investor there. I think they are kind of now. The other thing you have to think about is you might hit an S curve and then kind of reach the top of that niche market, and then you see if you can hit the next S curve. And I think they're at that stage now. Those are some examples that come to mind. Satoshi Energy, an investor there. I know those guys are just killing it in the energy industry. Those are a few examples.
Okay, I like it. Let's now talk about valuations, because then you've got a great founder, they hit product market fit, and now you're ready to do another round, and you're trying to help them raise. How are you thinking about valuations, and what's your framework for thinking about how a startup should be valued, especially in the Lightning space where, it's just the economies are a little bit different, and we don't have many data points to look back on yet.
Yeah, well, I'll speak about valuations and how I think about helping founders raise. I mean, in terms of valuations, again, this is somewhat of an art and a science, and it's also, dependent on the market. At the end of the day, I can tell you all the things I want to tell you, but it's a market. And so, if there's a tremendous amount of demand for a hot startup, then, you either pay what the founder is asking or you don't get in the round. And so for me, I prefer, just with my personality type and also I think the most interesting return profiles come. I love going very early. I love being first money into startups. If you're a founder out there and you're alone and you're, just thinking about an idea, it's never too early to hit me up. I love going at that stage. And, I typically like to do, with earlier stage valuations, if say you're doing a pre-seed round, it's, sub $10 million valuation, something like that. That gives us as a fund a chance to 1000x. That's my goal. Once you get kind of above that $10 million valuation range, it becomes much harder to 1000x. Not impossible, but that's kind of the goal. Seed rounds, let's say somewhere, 20, 25 mil or below, depending on the company. And again, in that range, you're hoping you can still 100x, but that's hard. So it's just kind of the different orders of magnitude. But at the end of the day, put all the valuation discussion aside, like we're in a business of outliers. And so I'm an early stage investor. And some of these later stage investors, they're having to do a lot more modeling and actually looking at business models and cash flows. Not to say that we don't think about business models and potential cash flows, we do. But the reality is, what matters is getting in the right one, period. Mm-hmm. And I've been faced with this decision a couple of times where it's like, I think this is overpriced based on what I'm seeing with other comps. But if my spidey sense and intuition tells me this thing is going to be, a massive unicorn or decacorn, then say you overpay by a few months, in the grand scheme of things, not a big deal. And so we're in the business of, one company can 10x your fund if you get the right company. And so it's more important that you don't have a sin of omission, is my view.
Yeah. Now, how do you think about the comparison of Lightning startups today to startups in, let's say, the fiat economy or like the Web 2 world? I know we've seen like valuations kind of come down in the later stage rounds as the stock market has come down. I get the sense still, though, that the Lightning Network startups are still in this like bull market where there's like a lot of demand for all sorts of rounds, and it's basically like I don't see much of that outside of the Lightning space in the crypto economy. And then I don't know well enough about how that compares to the broader global economy, but it seems like we're kind of like in this insulated environment where we're definitely seeing momentum in Lightning, and that's being reflected in the startup valuations. Do you think valuations today are at a sustainable, fair level in the Lightning ecosystem? Are they undervalued? Like, what's your sentiment on like valuations in Lightning versus the rest of the economy?
Well, first of all, I don't really know much about the Web 2 stuff these days, or even the later stage companies. I'm pretty focused on my lane, which is seed and pre-seed focused in Bitcoin and Lightning. What I can say is I'm not really seeing deals or capital dry up at all. In fact, I'm seeing quite the opposite at this moment. You also caught me on a busy day, so I'm a little biased. But I think that if you think about, there's two big forces happening right now in the world. There's this like everything in the world is crashing, and there's the little dog sipping his coffee while the world's on fire, and he's telling us everything is fine. And then in the Lightning Network world, you have this like incredible early hockey stick adoption is what I believe is happening. And so, my view is, and I tell all founders, obviously save for a rainy day. We don't know what's going to happen. I haven't seen things dry up yet. Doesn't mean it couldn't happen tomorrow. If we go into the next Great Depression, like all bets are off. I have no clue. At that point, like your guess is as good as mine. But as long as we keep having, adoption and scaling globally, and I can tell you from some of my companies like Pouch in the Philippines, Neutron Pay in Vietnam, IVEX Mercado throughout, Central and soon South America, like these regions are adopting. It's happening. Galoy, they just published this incredible talk with the Central African Republic that just made Bitcoin legal tender. It's like you have this exponential curve. It's not slowing, right? And so, I personally think that force is much stronger than, the economy crashing. I also think that we're lucky in the Bitcoin and Lightning world, partially because there's not as much, crazy loose fiat money chasing these deals, partially because they don't understand it. Because if you're chasing these crazy fiat deals with crazy valuations, you're probably not a Bitcoiner in the first place. But we never had at least in my view, I never was funding crazy valuations. Like I like to be, I'm a fairly conservative investor in that. Like I said, pre-seeds below 10 mil, seeds below 20 typically, like that's pretty healthy in my mind. And so I never saw anything get crazy. And so I'm kind of seeing, things be more or less the same right now. Later stage, no idea. Web 2 seems scary. Hearing all of my friends, SaaS companies seem like they're getting just absolutely taken the cleaner. But I don't know a ton about that. And then Web 3, someone asked me this on Stacker News. They're like, well, can VC model work in Lightning Network? Because it's not like, Web 3 where you can get a token and then you get all this liquidity. I'm like, well, that's not VC. That's like gambling on penny stocks and giving people liquidity to do that. That seems like a scam. And so the valuations that were happening over there, I just think we're completely untethered to reality always. And it does, to be honest, between us, like, I guess between me and everyone listening to this podcast, it does make me question on some of these VC funds that are doing this. I'm like, are you guys really doing your homework? Do you really believe it? I don't know. But at least at Hivemind, I've always been, kind of in my lane, responsible valuations, what I think is fair for us, fair for the founder, and I'm seeing that continue.
Right. Okay, I know we're running out of time, but I want to get into this segment that I'm trying to build up. It's basically an opportunity for any listener to send in a comment or question. It's called the lightning round, and we didn't have any listeners sending questions, but I have a few questions of my own for you. So
All
are you
right,
ready for the lightning round?
let's do it.
Welcome to the lightning round presented by Zebedee, your portal into the world of Bitcoin gaming. The Zebedee app offers a full-featured Lightning wallet seamlessly integrated with your own personal gamer tag so that you can earn Bitcoin on all of Zebedee's games on mobile and desktop. It's never been more fun to earn Bitcoin, and Zebedee is your key to it all. To claim your personal gamer tag and start earning some Bitcoin of your own, download the Zebedee app today. Okay, first, you said you're big on reading any books that have materially changed your view of the world.
Oh man. All right.
You got a list
I got
for
a
me,
bunch.
huh?
Dude, where do we even begin? I'm pulling a couple books here. Okay, so most recently, and I've got some recency bias. Stalking the Wild Pendulum. This is describes reality in a way I think this guy could be the next Einstein. Wild, and this book blew my mind. Truly blew my mind recently. What Technology Wants by Kevin Kelly. He also wrote Out of Control, which is kind of a Bible for me and a lot of I think technologists. I think he saw the future a long time before other people. I think he's just a great writer. So I'm a big fan of his. Other books that I don't have in front of me, I've got a bunch of others ones here, but I've got to give a shout out, even though I haven't finished all this, but Mastering the Lightning Network. If you haven't read this yet, Lalu, Andreas, and Renee do a great job. But I would say, some other books that have been influential for me, probably the Bhagavad Gita, this book, The Way of Zen by Alan Watts. I used to read more fiction. I don't do that as much anymore. I used to like Haruki Murakami novels a lot. I love to read. Always reading.
Love it. What Technology Wants was also recommended by Brian Murray, so it's 2 recommendations for that one.
Not surprised.
Okay, next question. You said that we'll have over 2 billion people using the Lightning Network in a decade. How many do you think are using the Lightning Network today on a daily basis?
I don't know. I mean, I think, the the Arcane Research Report, I forgot what they have, $400 million worth of volume or something like that per year. So number of users, I really don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on how many kind of custodial downloads there are. I mean, I know thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. Hard to say.
Yeah. It's interesting right now because there's a discrepancy between the number of people that have access to Lightning and the number of people actually using it, right? Like we have close to 100 million people with access because they got Cash App and all these different, there's, Kraken now, there's Paxful, a few others, and they combine to 100 million users, but not everyone is actively using it today.
And so to be clear, Cash App is the sleeping giant. When people realize that they can use Cash App, half of, if you think about using Lightning Network as a two-sided problem, one side of that, at least the United States, is totally solved. People don't realize it yet. So that's a big thing.
Yeah, I think actually this is where I think that game show idea that John Cantrell was talking about, I think that is where it could really blow up. Is if you 100%. Hit that right, all of a sudden anyone can participate in a game show in real life as long as you have Cash App, and everyone already has it, and it's people will just wake up and go, whoa, I never knew I could do this.
Totally. And David King, again, he's been mentioning for a long time, maybe the thing that makes Lightning go crazy is some silly app. Maybe it's a game show, maybe it's Polio Feed Volume 2. I don't know, but who knows,
Yeah. Okay. One other question. Actually, 2 more questions. First one is, if you could change something about the Lightning Network, what would you change?
I could change something about the Lightning Network. I guess I wish there were easier non-custodial tools and APIs for people to integrate.
Okay, I'll take that. If you could bet on one fiat company joining, running a Lightning Network node, it may be participating in the Lightning economy, let's say. So maybe it's running a node, maybe it's just integrating with their app. One fiat company that has nothing to do with Bitcoin or Lightning today, Who's your pick?
Well, I think Square or Block is the obvious one because they're already
But
doing it.
they're already
But
in. They hold Bitcoin. That doesn't count.
totally. Um, which fiat company is going to be next? I mean, PayPal. I mean, because they're already exploring crypto, that seems like that could be very likely. It seems like some of these, maybe emerging market fintechs. Like I know you have Salinas in Mexico tweeting a lot about Bitcoin and Lightning. That seems pretty likely. Perhaps some of these other sort of orange pill billionaires around the world that own their own payments networks. That could be interesting. I do sometimes think like, is there a world where Visa or Mastercard adopt this? And it seems unlikely, but that would be, it would be cool. I doubt it.
Yeah, fair enough. Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I learned a ton. I feel like we got in like 3 hours of information into this. It was just jam-packed with insights. So I appreciate your time. Where can listeners go to learn more about you and the work you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Max A. Webster. My fund is at Hivemind_VC. We don't really have much on there yet, but at some point I'm sure we will. And then the fund website is hivemind.vc. Again, one project I'll be pursuing soon is a redesign of the site. So if you're an eager Bitcoin Lightning designer, has some ideas for me, hit me up. I'm going to be looking in the next month or so. But yeah, Twitter's probably the best way to reach me.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the time. Hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
All right, in the last 7 days, you guys sent in 21,356 sats, came in from 5 different supporters. Thank you to everyone sending in sats. The top 5, first is an anonymous user, sent in 10,000 sats via Lightning address, which is kind of cool. kerooke at fountain.fm if you want to send some sats directly from any Lightning wallet that supports Lightning addresses. We had Peter sent in 9,470 sats. We had an anonymous user sent in 1,578 sats. Verbericha sent in 176 sats. And George Orwell sent in 132 sats. We also got a couple of comments. The first comment comes in from the anonymous user who sent the 10,000 sats via Lightning address. And they said, thanks for some great content. We also had an anonymous user, a different anonymous user, send a message saying, loved the interview with Adam Curry. That's episode 23 if you haven't seen it already. It's still one of the more popular shows that I've done to date, so definitely check it out. We also had Sean Yeager, who said, another great conversation in response to episode 51 with Roy Scheinfeld. Can't wait to see what you guys send in the next couple days. I've got an episode coming out on Tuesday, or filming on Tuesday. I'll be posting that on Twitter probably today if you're listening to this as soon as it drops. And you guys will have a chance to earn some sats by asking a great question for the guest. So keep an eye out on my Twitter and talk to you guys in a couple days.